Okay, so we are going to begin the last lecture. So yesterday, let me remind you that we calculated this two-point function, okay, which is one of the information that we needed for calculating the d-instanton correction. So today we will be focusing on the second ingredient, and that is the annulus one-point function. So although the principle here will be the same, okay, the calculation will be more involved. So I'll not go through the through every detail of the calculation, but I'll try to give as much details as I can. So let me remind you that the annulus one-point function, okay, after you have factored out the disk one-point function, so this is the ratio of the annulus one-point function and the disk one-point function. Omega is the energy of the closed string. Had a form like this, so there is a finite piece, okay, which you could compute by using analytic continuation or I epsilon prescription. But then there is a divergent piece, okay, which is here. So this integral diverges both from the v equal to 0 end, as you can see, because of these negative powers, as well as from the x goes to 0 end, okay, because of this 1 over sine square 2 pi x in the denominator. So we want to treat this using string field theory, okay, and the principle will be the same. So namely, we will first change variables from v and x to the showing parameters, okay, and after doing that, we'll use the appropriate replacement rule. Namely, the 1 over q square integral will replace by -1, and 1 over q integral will just simply set to 0, because those represent massless modes which will be integrated separately. But to do this, the first thing we need to know is what are v and x. Okay, what is the geometric interpretation of what v and x are in terms of the annulus geometry? Okay, and this is what I have described here. So we'll describe the annulus as a cylinder, okay, which is of course the same, okay, and we'll take the height of the cylinder to be fixed, that is pi, okay, and then the circumference is what we'll call log of v inverse. So this I have written in terms of this complex coordinate w, okay, so w, the real direction, that it extends from 0 to pi, okay, and in the imaginary direction there is a periodic identification by log of v inverse. Okay, so this is of course positive because v takes value in the range 0 to 1. And given this, now x is interpreted here. So this is 2 pi x, essentially is the distance of the closed string vortex operator from the boundary. That's also a modulus. And that's this integral over here. And you can see that I have integrated from 0 to 1/4, because when x is 1/4, this distance is pi by 2. Okay, that's halfway. And the reason that I have not integrated all the way up to this boundary is because those are of course the same. You just by simple reflection you can relate one to the other. Okay, so it's enough to integrate from x equal to 0 to 1/4. So this is the integral that we'll try to make sense of today. Are there questions on this? Okay. So we'll write the full annulus one-point function as g divergence, that's the divergent part of g, and the finite piece. But in this case, the divergent part of g will get contribution from several sources. Okay, and this is what I have listed here. So the first source is the most straightforward one, which I'll call the worldsheet contribution. So this is this integral as written. And you have to make this finite by using the appropriate string field theory algorithm, and that I have already said what it is, that you have to change variables from v and x to the showing parameters, and then use the appropriate replacement rule, okay, which gives finite result. Then we have to also include the psi1 exchange contribution. Okay, in fact, even for the this two-point function, we saw that if we make a general choice of local coordinate system, then there also we have a psi1 exchange diagram. In this case, even for the spatial choice of local coordinates that we had chosen yesterday, okay, we cannot avoid psi1 exchange diagrams. So these has to be included separately, and that I'll call that g psi1. But besides this, there will be two more contributions, okay, which these didn't contribute to this 2-point function, but they will contribute to the annulus 1-point function. So the first one is the contribution, which I'll call G Jacobian. And this is the contribution from the Jacobian that is associated with the change of variable from the open string field phi. Okay, that's the mode psi 3, okay, which multiplies alpha minus 1 C1 on the vacuum. So while relating that to the collective mode that describes the time transition of the D instanton, they are of course related, but there is a field redefinition involved. And that will generate a Jacobian which can also contribute to the 1-point function on the annulus. Okay, and we will see that it does. Okay, we will explicitly see how to calculate this Jacobian. So that's another extra contribution. And then finally, there is another Jacobian, and that comes from the redefinition of the gauge parameter. So to begin with, we have in the denominator a division by the volume of the gauge group, but that is expressed as an integral over the open string gauge transformation parameter. Okay, because as far as string field theory is concerned, it knows about the gauge transformation parameters in string field theory. But that we need to relate to the rigid U1 symmetry, okay, because that's what we know how to factorize. So in making this change of variable from the open string gauge transformation parameter to the parameter that labels rigid U1 symmetry, we'll run into another Jacobian, which will also contribute to 1-point function on the annulus. So these we have to explicitly take into account. So the final result for the divergent part of G will be a sum of all this. Okay? And we will see how to do this calculation. Any questions so far? Okay, so let me proceed. So let's start with the worldsheet contribution. Okay, as I said, this is the most straightforward one, although this is somewhat tedious. So in this case, we can again write down the Feynman diagrams. And these are the 4 Feynman diagrams that contribute. And I am including only those Feynman diagrams which have internal open strings. Okay, I'm not drawing any internal closed strings. They are all dumped into the common vortex. And the notation here is that a solid dot will represent a corresponding vortex on the disk. Okay, so this, for example, describes a 2-point vortex with 1 closed string denoted by the thick line and 1 open string denoted by the thin line. These kinds of vortices, on the other hand, are for amplitude on the annulus. Okay, so this, for example, represents 1-point function of the open string on the annulus. And you can convince yourself that each of these diagrams, okay, when you actually translate this into the string worldsheet diagram, okay, these do represent a 1-point function of the closed string vortex operator on the annulus. Okay. So maybe what I'll do is that I'll try to demonstrate this for the diagram B, okay, what this really means, but you can repeat this for all of these other diagrams. Okay. So diagram B, if you remember, consisted of a closed open disk amplitude, disk vortex. So this is a closed and open. Okay. And the other one was open string 1-point vortex on the annulus. So I'll draw this as an annulus. And then we have an open string propagator, so you want to show these two. And you can see what will happen when you show these two. What you will get is the geometry will look like this. Okay, so the disk is showed to the annulus. Okay, the open strings are of course gone because they are showed, but the closed string vortex operator still remains. Okay. So this you can easily identify as the closed string 1-point function on the annulus. Okay. And similarly, each of the other Feynman diagrams that you saw, okay, are also of this kind. Okay, they all describe the closed string 1-point function on the annulus. Okay, so let me now go ahead and try to describe briefly how we go about calculating this. Okay. So you see that we need some vortices, okay, some interaction vortices. Okay. This one we have already studied. Okay, closed open on the disk. I'll remind you how we describe this. Okay. But here we need a open string 3-point function on the disk. Okay. Here you need an open string 1-point function on the annulus. This, for example, is a disk 3-point function with 1 closed string and 2 open strings. And this is the closed string 1-point function on the annulus. Okay, and we'll see how these come about. Okay, so let's start with the triple open string vortex. So in my convention, O will denote open string, C will denote closed string. Okay, and the closed string will always refer to the external closed string tachyon. Okay, because there are no internal closed string states anywhere. So in the triple O vortex, okay, on the disk or on the upper half plane, of course, we can use the SL2R transformation to fix the positions anywhere we like. Okay. So it fixes the positions at 0, 1, and infinity. And the choice of local coordinates that I'll be making, okay, at these 3 points is given here. Okay, W1, W2, and W3. Okay. Alpha is an arbitrary constant, okay, which will take to be large just as we took lambda to be large earlier. Okay, but you could, so this is just for convenience. Otherwise, there's a restriction. We can work with any alpha that you like. Now, one can ask, what is special about this? Okay, why have we chosen certainly this particular structure? So first of all, one thing that is special is that each of these is an SL2R transformation, and that makes life much easier. The second point, okay, the second property that these vortices have, okay, is that you see there is a cyclic permutation that we can make between 0, 1, and infinity. Okay, if you take the transformation z goes to 1 over 1 minus z, okay, that takes 0 to 1, 1 to infinity, and infinity to 0. And you can convince yourself that that same transformation just cyclically permutes these 3 local coordinates. Okay. So we say this vortex is cyclically symmetric. Okay. And that makes life a little easier because otherwise you have to basically average over these different choices. Okay. If you go back to the previous diagram, for example, here, okay, if we didn't choose a cyclically symmetric vortex, okay, then you have to worry about whether this open string, okay, whether you use W1, W2, or W3. Okay, and you have to average over all 3 choices. But because you have chosen the vortex to be cyclically symmetric, all of them give the same result. So we can take this open string to be any of the 3. Okay, so in the local coordinate here, the puncture here, you can either take the puncture at 0 or 1 at infinity, okay, and show the local coordinates appropriately. Okay. This wouldn't have happened unless you had chosen the local coordinates to be permuted by cyclic transformation. So that's what explains why this peculiar choice of these local coordinates. The CO vortex I had already introduced yesterday. Okay, so it's a 2-point function on the disk or the upper half plane. We put the C at the point I on the upper half plane, O at the origin, and the local coordinate at O we choose to be W equal to lambda z. Okay, so lambda and alpha are arbitrary parameters at this stage. And as I have said already, for convenience, we'll take lambda and alpha to be large, but this is certainly not necessary. So by taking this to be large, you'll essentially throw away inverse powers of lambda and alpha in our analysis. But if you are not lazy, then you can do this calculation exactly. Okay, so now let's focus on the COO vortex. Okay, 1 closed string, 2 open strings. So in this case, we have, let's count how many parameters do we have. Okay, so C level requires 2 coordinates, and each of the O's require 1 coordinate. So you have 4 parameters to begin with. But using SL2R transformation on the upper half plane, you can fix 3 of those to wherever you like. So really there is only 1 parameter that's left over, okay, that you have to integrate over. So here I place the C at I, and I choose the 2 O's symmetrically. Okay, we put 1 at minus beta, 1 at beta, and then beta, of course, has to be integrated over. So you have to specify also the local coordinates at the location of the open strings. But the first we need to decide what is the range of beta that underlies this vortex. That CO vortex, right? That's this subdiagram. So this particular subdiagram should cover part of the moduli space of a disk with one closed string and two open string puncture. So you have to first understand which part of the moduli space it covers, right? Which range of beta does this subdiagram covers. And I'll describe the way we go about doing this. Okay, and this is a generic feature for in string theory. This is the way we construct string vortices. Okay, so let me explain how we decide on which range of beta to integrate over and what kind of local coordinates we should choose here. So the idea behind this is that we first determine the full COO amplitude. Okay, one closed string, two open string amplitude. And in that, we have to make sure that first we determine the range of beta that is covered by Feynman diagrams with known vortices. And then whatever is left, we dump into the COO vortex. And this is very similar to what happened yesterday, for example, when we looked at the two-point function of closed strings on the disk. Part of the region of Y integration was covered by a Feynman diagram with an intermediate open string. And whatever was left, we declared that as the two-point closed string vortex. And the philosophy is the same everywhere, in all cases. And this is necessary, of course, to reproduce the correct amplitude, but one can also show that this is necessary in order that the action satisfies the BV master equation. Okay, we wrote down the BV master equation yesterday. In order that the interaction terms in the action also satisfy the same master equation, we have to ensure this, that there is no gap in the moduli space. So let me explain how this is done, okay, in the next slide, and then it may become a little clearer. So COO disk amplitude, this you can convince yourself that this gets contribution from two Feynman diagrams with open string intermediate states. One is this one, and the other one is the contactor. So first, let's analyze this one, okay, and see which region of the beta space is covered by this. And to do this, we basically take the showing of the CO vortex with the OO vortex. Okay. So in the CO vortex, the local coordinate was lambda times z. And the OO vortex, I can choose to show the puncture at z equal to 0, okay, or z prime equal to 0. So that's this alpha times 2z prime over 2 minus z prime. So we equate this equal to q. And now we can determine the location of the punctures in the z plane. Okay, so the closed string puncture, of course, is the z equal to I, because that comes from this CO vortex. And the two open string punctures, okay, which are left out here, one was at z equal to 1, the other one is at z prime equal to 1, the other one is at z prime equal to infinity. And you can easily convince yourself that if you set z prime equal to 1, the location z, that corresponds to in the z plane, the position minus q over 2 lambda tilde. If you say z prime equal to infinity, okay, it's the other. Yeah, if you take z prime equal to infinity, then that corresponds to z2 equal to q over 2 lambda tilde. So this is really beta, right? Because we place the open string puncture symmetrically at minus beta and beta. And now you see that the range q from 0 to 1 basically covers the range where beta, mod beta is less than 1 over 2 lambda tilde. Because at q equal to 1, this becomes 1 over 2 lambda tilde. So the range between 0 and 1 over 2 lambda tilde is covered by the diagram A. So then we declare that this diagram must cover the region beta larger than 2 lambda tilde inverse. Okay, that's the way we determine which range of beta this covers. Similarly, local coordinates associated with this diagram, okay, must be chosen in such a way that at the boundary between A and B, right, that corresponds to the q equal to 1. At the boundary, the local coordinates that are induced from this diagram must match the local coordinate that is induced from this diagram. So here are the local coordinates, W1 and W2, that we induce from this diagram. So basically, you take the local coordinate around the leftover punctures at z prime equal to 1 and z prime equal to infinity, and re-express them in terms of z. Okay, that's what this really does. And rename them as W1 and W2. So whatever local coordinate you choose for this diagram should have a property that at beta equal to 1 over 2 lambda tilde, it should match up with this. Are there questions on this? Okay, so here I have given the choice. So beta basically it takes value for the CO vortex. Beta takes value in the range 1 over 2 lambda tilde to 1. Because we don't go for beta larger than 1, because that can be brought back to beta less than 1 by this z goes to minus 1 over z transformation. Okay, that gives the closed string puncture fixed, but maps these two ranges to each other. Okay. And so this is the choice of local coordinates. Okay, you can easily convince yourself that at beta equal to 1 over 2 lambda tilde, this matches up correctly. Okay. And this h is an arbitrary function. Okay, with these boundary conditions. Okay, this is what ensures that at beta equal to 1 over 2 lambda tilde, this matches up the W1 and W2 that we found earlier. Okay. And this condition h of 1 equal to 0 essentially ensures that the choice of local coordinate remains invariant under beta goes to minus 1 over beta, okay, or z goes to minus 1 over z at the boundary. So h at this stage is an arbitrary function that goes into the data about string field theory. And again, just like the parameters alpha and lambda, the final results better be independent of this choice of h. Okay, because there is a general argument which says that these different choices are all related by field definition. And here you would notice that I have introduced this new combination lambda tilde, which is alpha times lambda, because this appears in many places in the analysis. Okay, are there questions, comments? Okay, so I'll proceed. So similarly, we can look at the O amplitude on the annulus. So for this, we describe the annulus by identifying in the z plane, z to v inverse z, or equivalently in the w plane. Okay, if you define w to be I log z, that's the description we had used earlier. W is w plus I log v inverse. So if you want to calculate the O amplitude on the annulus, then the Feynman diagrams that contribute are these two. Okay, this is the elementary vortex. This is the Feynman diagram constructed from dot point function. So here basically you take a 3-punctured disk, okay, a disk with 3 open string punctures, and so 2 of the open string punctures to each other. Okay, this is in fact we described this on the first day. Okay. The only difference is that this time you have to do it with the specific choice of local coordinates that we described here. Right? So suppose you want to glue, for example, you want to show the puncture at z equal to 0 with puncture at z equal to 1, you have to use specific local coordinates as given here and determine which range of v it covers. And it's a simple exercise to show that this diagram covers this range. You basically have to look at the, so this gives an identification in the z plane, but you have to basically diagonalize this somehow and bring it into this form, okay, which can be done. And by doing that, you find that the diagram A covers this range. So diagram B must cover the rest. Okay. So this should include integration over V in the range V larger than alpha square minus half inverse. Here, of course, the upper limit is 1. And again, the choice of local coordinates at the open string puncture here have to be fixed by requiring that at the boundary, at V equal to alpha square minus half inverse, the choice of local coordinate from this diagram should match up the choice of local coordinate from this diagram. And that gives some boundary condition, and this is one choice that satisfies that condition. Okay, here in fact you can see that I have, this is the simplest possible choice because I have just chosen W to be independent of V. So whatever was the choice of local coordinates here for V equal to alpha square minus half inverse, I have continued that in this diagram. So I should add that this upper limit basically reflects that at q equal to 1, this is the value of V you get, right? Because there's a showing parameter q here. Right? As q goes to 0, V goes to 0. As q goes to 1, you get this. Are there questions? Okay. So with this, now we can find the change of variables and evaluate the worldsheet contribution to G. So these are the 4 diagrams. This had already drawn. So basically what you do is that you first see what part of the modular space, what part of Vx space is covered by diagram A, which part is covered by diagram B, which part is covered by diagram C, and whatever is left will be covered by diagram D. But this is of course a finite integral because all the degenerations have been included in this A, B, and C. So this is just, once you determine the range, you just do the integral by hand. Okay, that's the finite integral. So here I have just given an example. Okay, so for example, for diagram A, there are 2 showing parameters, Q1 and Q2. So basically Q1 is this one and Q2 is this one. And one can show that the relationship between V and X with Q1 and Q2 is given by this. Again, I have ignored higher powers of alpha inverse and lambda tilde inverse. Okay, so this is because I'm assuming the lambda tilde and alpha are large, but you can find the exact relations if you want. So this means that as Q2 ranges from 0 to 1 and Q1 ranges from 0 to 1, this diagram A covers certain part of the Vx space. So to evaluate the contribution from diagram A to the divergent part, basically what you need to do is to take this integral that you had written, this integral, re-express V and X in terms of Q1 and Q2, re-express V and X in terms of Q1 and Q2, and then use appropriate replacement rule, okay, namely integral dq q to the minus 2 you replace by minus 1, and integral dq q inverse you replace by 0. And by doing that, okay, you evaluate the contribution from all these 4 diagrams, and here is what I have given the results for. So the result for diagram A, for example, is here, diagram B is here, diagram C is here, and diagram D is here. After we add these, you get the worldsheet contribution to G, which is given here. And you see that this contribution, of course, depends on all these stray parameters, right? It depends on lambda tilde, it depends on alpha, it depends on the function h, right? And all of these dependencies better go away at the end, okay? And we'll see that they eventually go away, okay? But individual contributions do have those. Okay, so this finishes the calculation of the worldsheet contribution. Okay, now we are going to turn to the other contributions that we mentioned. Any questions so far? Okay, so let's now turn to the psi1 exchange contribution. So this comes from 2 diagrams. Okay, now we must ask why 2? Okay, because after all, we had these 4 diagrams over here, and any of the propagators could have been psi1. The reason that we have only 2 contributions is because of what we discussed yesterday, that in the closed open vortex on the disk, if the open leg is psi1, then this just vanishes. Okay, it vanishes because of certain properties. Okay, it would not happen for general choice of local coordinates, but for the simple choice of local coordinates that you have made, the closed open vortex vanishes. So for example, here this leg couldn't be psi1. Okay? This can be psi1, but not this one. Similarly, here this leg couldn't be psi1 because it just vanishes. So either this could be psi1 or this could be psi1, and those are the 2 diagrams that I have drawn in the next slide. These are the 2 psi1 exchange diagrams. And the calculation of this is more or less straightforward. So basically, psi1 propagator we had already determined yesterday. It's minus half. Okay. So you have to calculate this diagram. So we forget about this loop over here. Okay, first calculate this diagram. Okay. So it corresponds to 1 external open string, 1 external closed string, 2 open string. Okay. So there's a CO amplitude. Okay. And you had already determined the CO amplitude, analyze the CO amplitude here, for example. Okay, the 2 diagrams that contribute to CO amplitude. That's what we see here. So we determine the appropriate correlation function of the vortex operators on the disk, okay, 1 closed and 2 open, and multiply by minus half. That's the psi1 propagator. Okay, and you do the same thing here. So the calculation is straightforward. The only subtlety here is that the psi1 vortex operator is the state that multiplies psi1 is this. Right? The corresponding vortex operator is the derivative of C. And this is not a dimension 0 primary. So you have to be a little careful in evaluating these diagrams, because what you need to do is you have to insert this operator in the local coordinate system, that means the W coordinate system. Then you have to make an appropriate conformal transformation of this to map it to the Z coordinate system, that's the upper half plane coordinate, and then evaluate the correlation function. So I have given the details here. So let's suppose that the relationship between W and Z is given by Z equal to some function of W. Then the conformal transform of partial derivative of C from the W to the Z plane, okay, which I'll denote by F dot del W CW. So this is like a conjugation, okay, some operator in the conformal field theory, we conjugate by the operator in the conformal field theory to transform. That of course commutes with the derivative, so you can do that, take the derivative outside. Okay, this now becomes that the conformal transform of C. This is easy because C is the primary, dimension -1 primary, so that's given here. And then you just have to apply this derivative operator on this. Okay, so when the derivative acts on this F prime W inverse, you get this factor. When the derivative acts on C, you use chain rule. Okay, so this corresponds to derivative with respect to argument. So using chain rule, you get an F prime W that cancels this, and you get back the LC of F of W. So if this had been a primary of dimension 0, then this is the only term you would get. Okay? So this is extra term that you have to take into account. Otherwise, the calculation is straightforward. So here I'll give the result. Okay, by doing this, we can compute the psi1 exchange diagram, and this is what you get. Are there questions or comments? Okay, so let me proceed. So next we consider the Jacobians. Okay, so first let's look at the field redefinition of the translational zero mode, and I'll try to explain how this comes about. And I should emphasize that even though I'm discussing this in the context of two-dimensional string theory, this is generic to all instantons. Okay, whenever you have a d instanton in any string theory, you have to go through the same process. And in particular, the choice of local coordinates, etc., you can take to be the same that you have chosen here, right? Because the choice of local coordinates still have to be made, and you can use them, for example, in type 2b string theory as well. But anyway, so let me go ahead and discuss this in the context of the two-dimensional string theory. Okay. So field redefinition of translational zero mode. Okay, so what exactly do we mean here? Okay. So let's denote by phi, okay, or equivalently we also called it psi3 yesterday. This is the zero mode of the open string field theory that is associated with the state C1 alpha minus 1 0. Okay, so that means in the expansion of the string field, phi multiplies C1 alpha minus 1 on the vacuum. Now we expect that this mode should be related by some field redefinition to the collective coordinate phi tilde, which translates the d instanton along the time direction. Now, once we have made this change of variable from phi to phi tilde, then in fact life becomes simple, because in a given amplitude, you expect that the phi tilde dependence of the amplitude will always enter in the combination e to the minus I omega phi tilde. And this basically, so omega here is the total energy of all the vortex operators in the amplitude. So if, for example, you insert n closed string states of energies omega 1, omega 2 up to omega n, then this will be just sum over I omega I. And this structure basically follows from the fact that the phi tilde is a position of the d instanton in the time direction. So its dependence on phi tilde should be of this form, right? E to the minus I times energy times the position of the d instanton. But phi dependence may be a little more complicated because phi is not exactly phi tilde. Phi is related to phi tilde by field redefinition. Now, once you have changed variable from phi to phi tilde, then of course the phi tilde integral is easy to carry out because this integral just gives you the energy conserving delta function that you have been emphasizing. So this would be easy. Okay, so what we need to do is to find the actual transformation from phi to phi tilde. Because from the perspective of open string field theory or from string field theory, the path integral is to be carried out over phi, not over phi tilde. So you have to somehow convert the integration over phi into integration over phi tilde, and then you can apply this. So the strategy will be that you will have to make a change of variable from phi to phi tilde, keeping track of the measure of integration, and then carry out the phi tilde integral. But in that process of changing variable, you may pick up some Jacobian in the integration, and that Jacobian has to be taken into account because that will be part of the path integral. Is this clear? Are there questions? Okay. So let me now describe how this is done. So let's take an amplitude where you have two closed strings and one open string on the disk. So two closed strings and one open string. Let's count the number of parameters. So this has 2, and this has 1. So altogether 5 variables, okay, to start with, but 3 of them can be removed by SL2R. So you have 2 parameters, 2 variables left over, and I have chosen these 2 variables in an appropriate way. So the first closed string we have placed at I. Second closed string I have placed on the imaginary axis, so I times y. This exhausts all the freedom, SL2R freedom that we had. And so the open string have no choice, we will take it wherever it is, right? We place it at some point u, and then have to integrate over y and u. So this is a special open string vertex operator. That's the vertex operator, which is I root 2 times del x. Right? The integrated form of the vertex operator is I root 2 times del x, because that's what corresponds to the state. C1 alpha minus 1, the vertex operator for this is I root 2 del x times C. So when you go from the unintegrated to integrated vertex operator, you just get I root 2 del x. So there is a naive way of doing this integral, which is to first keep y fixed and use operator product expansion to figure out what the u dependence of the amplitude is. And that is determined easily. So this is I root 2 del x. So I root 2, and then there's a minus half in the xx op, if you remember, or del x op. So that gives you minus 1 over root 2. And then you just pick up the residues from this. So you pick up a residue at I, and because of the upper half plane, there's a image here at minus I, okay, and minus iy. So you get 1 over u minus I and 1 over u plus I. Similarly, 1 over u minus iy and 1 over u plus iy with coefficients omega and omega 2, because that's like e to the I omega 1x, e to the I omega 2x. And so now the u is being integrated along a real axis. So you can close the u contour, say in the upper half plane, and just evaluate this using the residue theorem. You pick up the residues at e equal to I and e equal to iy. Oh, I should have said this ICC is whatever is the integrand for the amplitude without this vertex operator, which we had seen yesterday what it is, right, in the computation of this one-point function. But let's just write it as ICC. So now if you do the u integral, you will get this. Okay, that's minus 1 over root 2, and then 2 pi I combines to give you minus I pi root 2. And you see that this indeed is the expected result, okay, up to this factor of pi root 2. So this would suggest that we simply identify pi root 2 phi as phi tilde. Okay, this phi is the open string mode because this is multiplied by phi. And the expected answer is minus I omega 1 plus omega 2 times phi tilde. So you just identify pi root 2 phi equal to phi tilde. So this would have been a naive expectation. However, now you should remember that in this diagram, you are supposed to integrate over u as well as over y. And as we integrate over y, this diagram actually is divergent. Okay, we had seen in the evaluation of the 2-point function on the disk, that there's a divergence as y goes to 0. Okay. And so you have to be careful in doing these integrals, because there's a divergence as y goes to 0, and so that will collide with u. Okay, and you have to make sure that you treat the divergences appropriately. Okay. And the idea is that once you have committed to string field theory, you have to keep using string field theory. So you have to regulate, you have to make sense of all these divergences using string field theory. Okay, and that's what we will describe next. So now we look at the CCO amplitude and ask what are the possible Feynman diagrams for the CCO amplitude. Okay, and these are the Feynman diagrams that enter. And you recognize that all of these vortices, whatever vortices we need, we have already found. Okay. This, for example, is the closed open vortex. This is the 3 open string vortex. Right? This is the closed open vortex. Okay, so, oops. So all of these interaction vortices we have already found. So now the calculation is straightforward. We use these showing parameters, figure out what these different diagrams, which region these different diagrams cover. And then whatever is not covered is covered by this. Okay, but this is of course a finite integral. So here I have given the result for coupling of this normalized phi. Okay, so phi prime, which I have called phi root 2 phi, pi root 2 phi. Okay, this is just overall normalization constant. And this is what you get. On the other hand, for phi tilde, okay, that's the genuine transition zero mode, the collective coordinate. That should be, the coupling should be minus I omega 1 plus omega 2 times the CC amplitude. And the CC amplitude, the 2-point function on the disk, we calculated yesterday, right? That's the F. F omega 1, omega 2 we calculated. And if you remember, your result is this. This was the formula for F that we found. And this is, of course, the normalization that you have to put in. Because everything was normalized by the disk, the product of 2 disk 1-point functions. So that's, I have put them in here. 2 sine hyperbolic pi omega 1 times 2 sine hyperbolic pi omega 2. And then this n e to the minus 1 over gs times gs. So now the idea is that if you compare these two, okay, you see that they are not the same. Okay. The minus half is common, okay, but then there's a lambda tilde over pi extra here. And here there's a log lambda tilde, whereas here there is log lambda. Okay, and lambda tilde is lambda times alpha. So in other words, there's an extra term. Okay, that here there's an extra term which is given here. So the coupling of phi prime and phi, or phi prime and phi tilde, are not the same. And this means that this is not enough. Okay, that this is okay. This is fine. This is, of course, you have defined phi prime in terms of phi, but you cannot identify phi prime with phi tilde. Okay. We have to find some appropriate relation between phi prime and phi tilde that explains where the extra term comes from. So this extra term has to be accounted for by some appropriate relation between phi prime and phi tilde. Is this clear? Are there questions? Okay, so let me proceed. So let's suppose that C denotes the closed string tachyon field of energy omega. Then the extra term, okay, so the extra term is an extra term in the CCO amplitude, right? So this can be regarded as some term in the effective action, some unwanted term in the effective action that couples 2 C's and 1 O. Okay, that's what would explain the extra term. So what is the unwanted term? It's here. Okay, it's just a rewriting of what we had. So we see the 2 C and 1 O sitting here. And this is exactly the expression that we had found here, the extra term expression. Okay. So you have to somehow make a field redefinition to get rid of this. And the way we do it is to note that there is another expected term. This is in fact a much simpler term. This is comes from the CO coupling. A phi prime, okay, for O and a C. Okay, that's the disk 2-point function, 1 open string, 1 closed string. This has no divergence. Okay. And you can easily check that there is a term in the effective action like of this form. So now we see that if we now make a field definition, if we now postulate a relationship of this form, that phi prime, the leading term is phi tilde, but then there is a subleading correction, okay, in the phi prime phi tilde relation, which is of this kind. And if you substitute here, then this extra term, this term over here, gives you 2 factors of C with a phi tilde. On the other hand, if you make the substitution here by phi prime as phi tilde, these 2 terms exactly cancel. This extra term can be compensated, can be cancelled by this field definition that appears here. And A is given by this expression over here. So this then determines what kind of field definition you have to make. Phi prime and phi tilde are related by a field definition of this kind, okay, with this specific choice of A. And this is what we are going to use next. Any question? So here there is the full field definition. Okay. Pi root 2 phi is given by phi tilde plus this correction, okay, with A given here. Okay. And so now we can look at the Jacobian. Okay. So we had d phi to begin with. Okay. The open string field theory told us that you have to integrate over phi. Okay. That is related to phi tilde by this. So the Jacobian is 1 over pi root 2, that comes from here, okay, times 1 plus gs times this integral. And if you want to write this, think of this as the correction to the effective action, you can exponentiate it. Okay. So you get 1 over pi root 2 times exponential of this, and then of course there are corrections over ts square, which you don't care at this stage. Okay. So this gives a new term in the effective action, okay, which is here. Okay. And now you see that because of the appearance of C, which is the closed string field, okay, this will induce an extra contribution to the one-point function of closed strings. And that's of the same order as the annulus amplitude, because there is a G string sitting outside. So that gives you the contribution to G of omega from this Jacobian. Okay. So A of omega was given somewhere here. Okay, you can see this 2 sine hyperbolic pi omega, right? This went away because we always normalize by the disquant point function, and this is the disquant point function. Okay. So the definition of G involves normalizing by disquant point function. So this goes away. Okay. And GS also you take outside. That's not part of definition of G. So G Jacobian is just A of omega, and that's here, okay, which is given here. So this then determines that what is the contribution to one-point function of closed string tachyon from the Jacobian associated with the collective coordinates. Are there questions? Okay, so if not, let me proceed. So this is the final step, okay? And that's the redefinition of the gauge parameter. So let me remind you what the issue was. Okay? So we had a ghost field psi2, okay, that multiplied the vacuum, okay, in the expansion of the string field. Okay? And after we did the manipulations that we did yesterday, we are supposed to do an integration over psi2. Okay? But psi2, of course, is Grassmann odd. Okay, naively the integral will vanish. But then we also said that the way to interpret this is that instead of thinking of this as an integral over the ghost field, okay, we should think of as a division by the volume of the gauge group. Okay. So string field theory has a gauge transformation parameter that also multiplies this vacuum state. Okay. This is the ghost that we get when you try to gauge fix it, okay, wrongly. Okay, by wrong gauge fixing, you would have gotten this. Okay. So let's not think of this as a ghost, but let's think of the integral over psi2 as being division by the volume of the gauge group. Okay. So in other words, there is a string field theory gauge transformation parameter that associated with this state, with this vacuum state, okay, and let's call that theta. Okay. And integration over the host field psi2 is like division by d theta. Okay. And the question is, how do you carry out this division, okay, over the volume of the gauge group? So the strategy that we had suggested, okay, was that we will compare the transformation that is generated by theta, to the transformation that is generated by the rigid U1 gauge transformation parameter, which I'll call theta tilde. I'll describe in the next slide more precisely what we mean by this rigid U1 gauge transformation. But the idea is that once you identify the relationship between theta and theta tilde, then we can write d theta, okay, in the denominator as j times d theta tilde with some Jacobian. And then because theta tilde is just a U1 transformation, its volume is just 2 pi, right? It's just a pure phase. So integral d theta tilde will be 2 pi. And what you are left with is a 1 over Jacobian, because you are dividing by the integral d theta. That gives exponential minus log j. And this is a new correction to the effective action, which can also give rise to closed string tadpole, closed string one-point function. So that was the philosophy suggested. And what we'll do now is to explicitly carry out that procedure. Are there questions or comments? Okay, so let me proceed. So what is this rigid U1? So under this rigid U1, all open string states on the d instanton are neutral. But the rigid U1 can be seen, the effect of rigid U1 can be seen if we bring another spectator d instanton near the original d instanton. Because then what happens is that any open string that is stretched from the original d instanton to the spectator is charged under this U1. Right? That's the definition of the U1. Okay, this U1 basically is gives a phase to any open string that starts on the d instanton and ends somewhere else. Which means if theta tilde is a rigid U1 gauge transformation parameter, well, I shouldn't call it really gauge transformation, even though we divide by this. Okay, it's not local, right? It doesn't depend on anything. It's just a parameter. So any open string that's stretched from the original d instanton to another d instanton picks up this phase. Right? That's the definition of what the rigid U1 transformation does. And that's what we are going to exploit. So let's suppose that we have some string field chi. Okay, so it is any string field component of the open string that stretches from the original d instanton to the spectator d instanton. Okay. So under rigid U1, okay, it picks up a phase e to the I theta tilde. So if you take infinitesimal version of the rigid U1, then the transformation of chi is of the form delta chi equal to I theta tilde times chi. Okay. And no, there are no further corrections. Okay, this is all that we have. So the goal will be that we compare this transformation law to the actual open string gauge transformation, to the gauge transformation that is generated by the open string gauge transformation parameter. And of course, the open string field gauge transformation laws are known. Okay, they are in fact given by the master action itself, appropriate derivatives of the master action. So you can calculate what delta chi is generated by the parameter theta, which multiplies the vacuum state. And here I have given the result. Okay, but the result, as I said, is given in terms of the master action. So it again requires calculating some Feynman diagrams. Okay, and doing that, you can calculate what the transformation is. So the idea is that now we compare this with this. K omega is just a function, okay, known function, which I have given here. This is what is computed using the Feynman diagrams. C is the closed string tachyon field. So by comparing this with this, we see that we have to identify I theta tilde with this combination. This determines the relationship between theta and theta tilde. And now all you have to do is to figure out what the Jacobian is under this change of variable. Are there questions or comments? Okay, so let me proceed. Okay, so here it is. The relationship between theta tilde and theta, k is a known function. So now you see that if we divide the path integral by the integral d theta, this theta is the gauge transformation parameter of open string field theory, then this can be regarded as division by integral d theta tilde, but then we have a extra factor. Okay, so 1 over integral d theta is 1 over I times this times integral d theta. And so this gives you a factor like this. Yeah, I think I made a mistake somewhere probably. No, it's fine, yeah, because theta is d theta is in the denominator. Okay. So this is the extra factor that we get in the path integral. Okay. So this again you can interpret as a new term in the effective action because this is in the exponent. Okay. And that degenerates a one-point function of the closed string tachyon. Okay. And that is proportional to k. Okay. Again, you have to take out the factor of 2 sine hyperbolic pi omega, okay, and the factor of gs. What you are left with is 1 over pi times this, and that's exactly this. So that's the contribution that comes from the Jacobian that is associated with the gauge parameter redefinition. Is this clear? Are there any questions? Okay, so now it's time to put things together. So here is a collection of all the results. Okay, we have computed these 4 different parts of G. The worldsheet, direct worldsheet contribution, the psi1 exchange contribution, the Jacobians. Okay, this is the Jacobian for the translational collective coordinate. This is the Jacobian for the gauge parameter redefinition. And now you can add them up. You see that each of these depend on the various parameters of string field theory in a non-trivial way. But once you add them up, you get a nice simple answer. This still depends on one of the parameters lambda. So if you compare this with the general parameters that we had given, AG plus BG times omega square, okay, we see that AG you get to be minus half and BG you get to be half log lambda square by 4.
Hello. Hello. Ashok.
Also
Can you hear me?
Yes. Sorry.
Oh, yeah. It seems the network was not stable. Yeah. Now it's fine. Yeah.
Now it's okay. I mean, was it a long time that it was not stable?
No, just maybe a few seconds. Yeah.
Okay. So what I tried to emphasize here is that while BG depends on lambda, okay, which is an arbitrary parameter that enters the definition of string field theory, this combination is perfectly well defined, and this is the one combination that enters the S matrix. So this essentially determines the physical components of F and G completely, namely AG, AF, and this combination 2BG minus BF. Any questions so far? Okay, so if not, let me now turn to the next problem, and that is to calculate the overall normalization. If you recall, this was found by BRY. They found that by comparing with the matrix model, they got the result minus 1 over 8 pi square. And you want to understand how to do this calculation from string field theory perspective. Again, this is divergent in worldsheet theory, but you want to see if we can calculate this using string field theory. So let me explain these various factors. So I here, okay, in fact, is the standard factor of I that I multiplies all string amplitudes. Okay. So whenever you have the worldsheet result, okay, that's like doing an Euclidean calculation. To compute the S matrix from there, you always have to multiply by a factor of I. Okay. This is like in quantum field theory. When you do the S matrix calculation, you have this, because in the Lorentzian version, you have e to the is in the exponent, right? The Feynman rules always involve an extra I, okay, and that's this I. Zeta is a numerical factor, which I'll try to explain later. Right now, let me just say that this essentially depends on how the actual steepest descent contour of the instanton fits inside the actual integration contour. Okay, but I'll discuss this in more detail later. And this is what I had emphasized yesterday, the exponential of the annulus amplitude. This is what diverges in string theory. This is what the worksheet computation gives, and this diverges in string theory. So here is the general expression for the annulus amplitude. It's given by this integral over t of e to the minus 2 pi t L naught trace with a trace weighted by whether it's for bosonic it's with a plus sign, for fermionic states it's with a minus sign. But otherwise it's the straightforward trace on the worksheet in the worksheet CFT. And typically this diverges from the large T region because you may either have L0 equal to 0 state or negative L0 state. So here is a more explicit way of writing this. So sum over all the bosonic states, HIB are the L0 eigenvalues of the bosonic fields, and these are the L0 eigenvalue of the fermionic fields. Are there any questions on this? So I'll show that.
What's the fermionic modes?
Fermions are ghosts. In the two-dimensional bosonic string theory, it will be the ghost modes.
Oh yeah, the ghost. Thank you.
Right?
Yep.
So all those are included here. Yeah, of course, in superstring theory, you'll also have genuine fermions, right? But in the two-dimensional bosonic string theory, it's the ghost modes which are appearing here. Is that okay? Okay, let me proceed. Maybe I should show the result for two-dimensional string theory here. So this is the result for two-dimensional string theory. So this one you can recognize it comes from the tachyon, okay, because H is minus 1. This minus 1 comes from the following result. So this is the Siegel gauge spectrum. Okay. So in the Siegel gauge, we saw that there is one massless mode, okay, which describes the translation of the D plane. That's a bosonic mode. Okay. So that should have been a +1. Okay. But then you also had found that in the Siegel gauge there are two fermionic zero modes. Right? One the vacuum, the other one is C1, C minus 1 the vacuum. So that gives you -2, and that's what explains why this -1. Okay, so in the annulus partition function in two-dimensional string theory, you have both bosonic mode and the fermionic mode. Okay, so that's the general expression over here. Okay. Now, as I said, typically in all string theory, this is finite from the t equal to 0 end, okay, which means that this thing in the square bracket actually vanishes as t goes to 0. Another way of saying this is the number of fermionic and bosonic states are equal in typically in string theory. Okay. So the divergences really come from the t goes to infinity end. Okay, but let's not worry about those divergences right now. Let's pretend that these are all positive. HIB and HIF are positive, and see if we can get a more physical understanding of what this represents. So if we pretend that these are positive, then you can do the integral analytically, okay, and if the numbers are the same, so that this is finite at t equal to 0, then you can do the integral analytically and you get the annulus amplitude to be given by this. Okay, it's the half log of the product of the fermionic L0 eigenvalues divided by the product of bosonic as L0 eigenvalues. And I should also say that fermionic modes always come in pairs, right? That, for example, the two ghost pairs, right? The vacuum and the C1, C minus 1 of the vacuum, right? They are always paired. So this object, okay, or n, which is the I zeta times the exponential of this, now is given by this. And the idea is that now we want to reinterpret this as a result of a path integral in string field theory. In fact, this is the path integral in the Siegel gauge because the eigenvalues that you are counting are L0 eigenvalues, right? And we know that it's in the Siegel gauge that the kinetic operator is the L0. So this I'll rewrite as the integral over the bosonic modes, integral over the fermionic pairs of exponential minus half h times b square and then h times f tilde f. Okay, so pair of fermionic modes for each h. This prime means that you are summing over only pairs, right? So the number of terms in the sum here is half of the number of terms that appear here. And the normalizations are important. Okay, they are. It's precisely this normalization that gives you this ratio. Is this clear so far? So all I have done is that I have interpreted the exponential of the annulus amplitude as an integral in string theory over the bosonic and the fermionic modes. Okay, so here is the expression again. Now, as I said, this identity, right, this manipulation, of course, is valid when all the h's are positive. The divergences come because the sum of the h's become negative, right? And that's where string field theory comes in. You have to use string field theory to make sense of these divergences. So the divergences come when, say, one of the h's hb is negative, or some of the h's are 0. So the strategy to make sense of this is that we will first interpret this integral as the Siegel gauge fixed path integral over the 0-dimensional open string fields. Now here you see that there are some modes with the tachyonic modes, right? The tachyonic modes are in fact easy to handle, because tachyonic mode, suppose h is negative, right? That means in the exponents you have you have half b square instead of minus half b square, and you are supposed to integrate over b. But this you are familiar with it from the steepest descent method, right? If you have a saddle point which is not a minimum but say maximum or a local maximum, then typically in order to define the integral we choose the steepest descent contour, which means that in this case we'll choose the b integration contour to be along the imaginary axis instead of along the real axis. Okay, that's the way we'll make sense of the b integral. The tachyonic modes will handle this way, and for the 0 modes we'll basically say that the 0 modes appear because of some problem in the Siegel gauge fixing. So we'll go to the gauge invariant form and then try to make sense of this. So once you have gone to the gauge invariant form, okay, namely the integration over the gauge invariant action divided by the volume of the gauge group, then you have to do the integration over the 0 modes carefully. Okay, and that's the way you try to do this integral. Any question? Now here, this is, I have already showed this for the 2-dimensional string theory. The annulus amplitude in fact is very simple. So in particular, what it shows is that all the L0 larger than 0 states cancel. So you really don't have to worry about the integration over the L0 larger than 0 states, right? And we can focus on integration over the finite number of L0 less than or equal to 0 modes. So it really becomes, so this integral really becomes a finite dimensional integral in the case of 2-dimensional bosonic string theory. And in fact, it's not just in 2-dimensional bosonic string theory. If you are doing a similar calculation, for example, in d-instanton in type 2b string theory, the same thing happens. Okay, all the positive L0s in fact cancel between the Nebus Sword sector and the Ramond sector. Anyway, so let's go back to 2-dimensional string theory. So the integrals that were left over is the integration over the tachyon, that's the psi 0. Then integration over the translational 0 mode, the phi. Integration over the psi 1, this is the gauge unfixed form, right? So there we saw that we have to introduce this mode psi 1 that multiplies C0 on the vacuum, weighted by 2 to the minus s. And then you divide by the integration over the volume of the gauge group, okay, integral over d theta. And the action here, okay, depends on psi 0. This is the tachyonic mode. Okay. And if you remember, yesterday we also derived the action for the psi 1 mode, okay, and that was given by minus psi 1 square. So now we see that the psi 0 and psi 1 integrals can be done. We simply choose the steepest descent contours to be along the, because it's e to the minus s, right? These blow up as if you try to integrate along the real axis, or you simply choose the steepest descent contours of the psi 0 and psi 1, which are along the imaginary axis, and carry out the integral about along those directions. So here I have already said psi 1 is out of single gauge 0 mode. So the psi 0, psi 1 integrals can be done explicitly. And the result of doing that is, so you get two factors of I. Okay, sorry. I should have had one more factor. Yeah, so two factors of I. Yeah. Okay, so I zeta is this factor. You get two factors of I because of the steepest descent contours are no longer the imaginary axis, right? So you get one factor of I from the psi 0 integral, one factor of I from the psi 1 integral. Okay. And furthermore, you have 1 over root 2. Because with this normalization, the psi 0 integral gives you 1, but with this normalization, psi 1 integral gives you 1 over root 2. So that's this. And then you are left with the integration over the collective mode and integration over the gauge parameter. So this is what we get at present, okay, by doing this. Is it clear? Any question? Okay. So now we have to do these integrals. And now we recall that we had already found earlier the relation between phi and phi tilde. This time we only need the relation at the leading order, okay, because we are trying to calculate the normalization. So phi was determined to be 1 over pi root 2 times phi tilde, and theta was determined to be I times theta tilde. So put those in here. So after doing that, the phi tilde integral just produces the energy conserving delta function. Okay? That's of course not included normally inside the definition of n. Is written separately as a factor. And the integration over theta tilde gives 2 pi. So that basically finishes this part of the calculation, right? So you get minus I times zeta over root 2. You get a 1 over I from this change of variable and 1 over 2 pi from the theta tilde integral. So that's basically minus xi over root 2 times pi root 2, that gives you 2 pi, another factor of 2 pi from here. So that's minus I zeta over 4 pi square. So what remains is to explain what zeta is and then calculate zeta. Are there questions? Okay, so now let me explain what is zeta. Okay, this is in fact normally used in the study of steepest descent contours, or more generally what are called left edge symbols. So these are called multiplier factors. And what zeta measures is how the steepest descent contour around the instanton fits inside the full contour along which the path integral is to be performed. So let me explain how to compute zeta in the present context. So let's suppose that psi 0 is the tachyonic mode. So let's look at how the tachyon potential looks. This in fact has been known since the late 90s. How does the tachyon potential on a d instanton, or for the example any unstable d brane look? And for bosonic string theory, the tachyon potential has this kind of shape. So let me explain. So psi 0 equal to 0, this describes the original d instanton. So that's the maximum of the potential, okay, reflecting that the psi 0 is a tachyonic mode. It's also known that on one side, namely the positive side, the potential has a minimum. And that minimum, in fact, has a physical understanding. This is the vacuum where the d instanton disappears. This is the perturbative vacuum. This jump is exactly 1 over g string. So I have called that, parameterize that by 1 over a, okay, where a is some parameter. Okay, the precise value is not important. But on the negative side, the potential is unbounded from below. Okay, so on this side, the potential goes to minus infinity as psi 0 goes to minus infinity. And so the idea is that based on this structure of the potential, we have to decide what integration contour for psi 0 you should choose to define the path integral. And the idea is that you have to choose an integration contour appropriately so the path integral is well defined. Okay, is this clear? Are there questions? Okay, so here is a potential again. Okay, we see that the main, so the one point about the potential that's going to be important, that it goes to minus infinity as psi 0 goes to minus infinity. So we'll model the potential by a cubic potential like this, although it's certainly not necessary. Okay, it's just useful to model it this way. So minus half psi 0 square implies that it's a psi 0 is a tachyonic mode when you expand it around the vacuum. Okay. And this a psi 0 cube, okay, basically guarantees that there is a minimum at psi 0 equal to 1 over a. I think, in fact, I didn't write the potential correctly. I should have also added a constant, okay, because it is known that at the minimum the potential actually vanishes, right? That's what shows that it's a perturbative vacuum, okay, where the energy goes to 0 or the action goes to 0. Okay, so now we can ask what kind of psi 0 integration contour you should choose. So the naive expectation would have been the psi 0 should be integral along the real axis, right? Minus infinity to infinity. But we see that that has a problem, because if you really take it to a minus infinity to infinity, then as psi 0 goes to minus infinity, the potential actually goes to minus infinity, right? So e to the minus v, which appears in the exponent, the weight factor, that goes to plus infinity, right? So the integrand blows up as psi 0 goes to minus infinity. So that clearly is not a suitable definition of the path integral, right? You cannot take psi 0 integral from minus infinity to infinity. Now on the positive side, there is a problem. We can take it to be plus infinity as psi on this end. But to see where it goes on the left end, we have to see in which region, in which asymptotic region the potential goes to infinity, okay, and not to minus infinity. And that's in fact these regions. Okay. We can take 60-degree cones around either plus infinity, that's the this end, okay, the positive end, or around e to the 2 pi I3, that's the axis making 2 pi I3 angle with the real axis, okay, or e to the 2 pi I3 on this side, okay, e to the minus 2 pi I3 or e to the 2 pi I3. So that is basically 120-degree lines. You can draw these 120-degree lines, and along each of those, the potential actually goes to infinity. So the natural choice of contour would be either that you start from somewhere here and go here, or you start from somewhere here and go here. They're just complex conjugate contours. Is this point clear? So the correct choice of contour, right, that makes the path integral well defined, is either this one or this one. Okay, the precise nature, of course, doesn't matter, because you can always do contour deformation, but the asymptotic should be fixed. Are there questions? Okay, so now we want to express this as union of the steepest descent contours. Okay, because the steepest descent contours are the ones which are captured by the either the perturbative contribution to the S matrix or the instanton contribution to the S matrix. So the perturbative contribution, perturbative S matrix, steepest descent contour. So the perturbative saddle point is here, right? This is the minimum of the potential. And the steepest descent contour runs like this. And you see that indeed the whole of that can be included in the integration contour. On the other hand, the steepest descent contour of the instanton, okay, starts from e to the minus 2 pi I by 3 and goes all the way to e to the 2 pi I by 3. Okay, it's this contour. Okay. And indeed, you can see this because when he did this integration over the tachyon, over the psi 0, I said that I can do the psi 0 integral, right? So here the psi 0 integral was being done from minus infinity to infinity, okay, or minus I infinity to plus I infinity, right? That's what gave rise to this I over here. Okay. Whereas what that picture is telling us is that you shouldn't integrate from minus infinity to minus I infinity to plus I infinity. you should really integrate from minus I infinity to 0 from this perspective. Okay, it's only half of the steepest descent contour that you should include. Okay. And this is what fixes zeta. Okay, so zeta is basically this fraction. Okay. What fraction of the steepest descent contour you should include in the definition of the path integral. Okay. So this fixes zeta to be half. Okay, because you are really including only half of the steepest descent contour. Okay. So n is minus zeta over 4 pi square. That is the formula that we had derived earlier. Okay. Here, okay. So once we set zeta equal to half, okay, we get minus 1 over 8 pi square. Okay. And this is indeed in perfect agreement with the matrix model result. Any question? Okay, so next, let me say very briefly how to compute C. Okay. Now, as I said, C, this is the final constant that you have to calculate. Okay. So this we had defined as the amplitude on as a partition function on a surface of Euler number -1, okay, which can include either a disk with 2 holes, that's what I have displayed here, or a torus with 1 hole. Okay, that's I have not drawn that, but that also has to be included. Okay. So in principle, you can use string field theory to regulate all the divergences and calculate this. Okay. Is that the calculation is much more complicated and it has not been done. Okay. So what I'll do in the next 2 or 3 slides is to give an indirect argument to show that C actually vanishes. Okay, but you should keep in mind that this is an indirect argument and it's not completely rigorous. Okay. So let me go through the argument anyway. Okay. So first of all, let's see what this amplitude does. Okay, if you denote this contribution as C times Gs, then what it does is it takes any amplitude and multiplies the leading term by C times Gs. Now this we can see can also be reinterpreted as a renormalization of the instanton action. Because if you take, for example, the e to the minus 1 over Gs was the classical action. If you multiply by 1 minus C Gs square and expand in power series in Gs, you get e to the minus 1 over Gs times 1 plus CGS. So multiplying an amplitude by CGS is equivalent to renormalizing the instanton action by this factor of 1 minus CGS square. So this is the interpretation that we're going to use to fix C. And for this, we now go back to the matrix model. So I have not said very much about what matrix model it is or how it comes about. This you will see, I think, in more detail in this lecture. Okay. But let me just say, for the purpose of this talk, that the matrix model, okay, in this case, is described by a set of free fermions in inverted harmonic oscillator potential. Okay, so the Hamiltonian is given here. Okay. And the idea is that the vacuum that describes this bosonic string theory is where the Fermi levels, so these are fermions. So you fill the Fermi level up to a given value, okay, which I'll denote by minus mu, measuring energy equal to 0 at this point. And the instantons, what they do is that they describe tunneling from one side to the other side, okay, at the Fermi level. So the instanton action, okay, then is just you can calculate easily, okay, just a simple classical problem. Harmonic oscillator, inverted harmonic oscillator motion. So you can check that the instanton action is given by 2 pi mu. This is a classical action. And then there's a constant which can come because there are quantum fluctuations around the instanton background. But what is clear from this picture is that there are no corrections beyond that one loop. And the reason is that the Hamiltonian is exactly quadratic, okay, or the action is exactly quadratic. So one loop determinant is exact. Okay, there's no interaction here. So the instanton action doesn't get renormalized beyond one loop. Okay, so the general form of the renormalized instanton action is 2 pi mu plus constant. So the idea now is that you want to translate this to a dependence on the string coupling. Okay. And this is what the way BRY defined that string coupling. Okay, that 2 pi mu is 1 over G string. So given this definition, the matrix model instanton action can be written as 1 over G string plus just a constant, but no further correction. On the other hand, the C, we see that represents the correction of the form 1 over gs times 1 minus c gs squared. So that's the correction of order gs. So if you take this argument seriously, if you equate the matrix model instant on action with the D instant on action, okay, both quantum corrected, then we see that C must vanish. Because the matrix model instanton doesn't have a correction of order C times Gs. But I should again emphasize that this is not a rigorous argument, because by strict rules, we are not allowed to compare instanton action in the two theories. Right? The things that we are allowed to compare are physical amplitudes, S matrix elements. If we want to do that, then you really should go back and calculate this in string field theory and see what you get. Okay, because that's what enters the expression for the S matrix. So comparing instant and action gives a nice result, but it's not a rigorous result. Are there any questions? Okay, so let me then summarize. So these are the results that we have found using string field theory. And these are the results that BROI found by numerical analysis, numerical comparison of the matrix model, except this one, which was determined analytically. And the main point I want to emphasize is that all the constants agree, except this one. It still remains a puzzle. And hopefully somebody will solve this puzzle sooner or later. But at this point, there is still disagreement between these constants computed from string field theory perspective and from the numerical comparison of the matrix model results. So with this, I'll come to the final remarks. So what I have done in these lectures is to focus specifically on D instantons in two-dimensional bosonic string theory, because that's where calculations have been explicitly done, and that's where also the results are known from comparison of the matrix model. But I should emphasize that D instantons are common to most string theories. Right? All type 2 string theory has D instantons. Heterotic string theories don't have D instantons, but of course, typically they also have type 2 duals which have D instantons. And the problems that we discussed are universal problems for all D instantons. For example, the breakdown of the Siegel gauge. Right? This you can show is true also in superstring theory. Translation and zero modes, of course, exist in superstring theory. The rigid U1 transformation that we saw, that also exists in superstring theories. So the problems that we described, okay, and the solutions that we described are universal. Okay, the details may differ, but the problems and the solutions are universal. And indeed, string field theory for superstrings is well established by now and can be used to address these issues. So in principle, now we have all the tools to start using string field theory to compute D instanton corrections to superstring theory. And once we have a fully systematic method for doing these calculations, they could eventually provide a window into non-perturbative aspects of string theory, because these are corrections of order e to the minus 1 over G string. Nevertheless, the techniques that we'll be using are perturbative techniques. Okay, in fact, that's the beauty of D instantons, that it allows you to calculate non-perturbative aspects, okay, but just using perturbation theory, because D instantons, okay, are like ordinary D planes, have fully perturbative description. So with this, I'll conclude these lectures. Thank you very much.